So as we move over to the stove, you can see our garlic's been sitting and resting. Nice brownness to it. It's done. We're just going to set that back behind us until we're ready for it. We're going to start searing meat. One of the things you want to consider searing meat is that you don't want a pan, you don't want your pan to be too small that there's not a lot of surface area. You really want to get this high heat, sear, nice caramelization. The other thing is you want to go as hot as you're comfortable with. This is my strongest burner at home. I don't know what the BTUs are. It's the one I use the most. I'm just going to put my pan on there. I'm going to let it, give it a few minutes to get good and hot. I already have myself set up. I have my tongs ready. I have my drain screen. This is one of the things that I think gets lost as I bury mine. A little bit on the home cook. Professionals, we use it all the time. All it is a sheet pan, a resting screen, and when we come out of the oven, the food will go, or the proteins will go right on here to rest until we're ready to cut them. It's very important to let proteins rest for a little bit before you cut them, so that the juices kind of get sucked back into it when you've been cooking them. It tends to pull a lot of juices out of them. You cut them right then, you know, you have all that falls all over your cutting board, and it's kind of wasted. So we're going to work that. That here next to us, we have our potatoes on and rolling. I apologize, I'm not a home safety cook, so my handles stick out. I've warned my kids not to run by the stove. So what we want to do is hit that with a little bit of olive oil. You want enough oil that it covers the bottom of the pan, because your oil is going to act as the insulator between your heat and your protein. If you take and put your protein straight down the pan with no oil, it's just going to burn. There's nothing there to kind of separate the heat in the metal from the protein. So it's just going to stick to it, it's going to sear, and you're not going to be happy at the end of the day with what comes out. You'll see one of the things I always work with is some salt and pepper next to me. We want to take our pork chop, we're going to do first, and we're just going to take and really heavily season this. Now, I'm not shy with the salt and pepper. It's going to help bring out some moisture. It's also going to help to season it and caramelize it up. So you'll see one of the tricks to being, one of the tricks to working the lines. Now you apply it hot enough, you drop some salt in there, it starts that little bubble, and you're good to go. We're going to start with just a pat of butter in there. We're going to let that brown a little bit. Helps with the nuttiness, helps with the flavor, also helps with the moisture retention. One of the things you don't want to do is we don't want to brown this like we did the raviolis last week as brown. So when it gets to that point, give it a little swirl. We'll come over. When laying your meat in the pan, always lay it down so it splashes away from you. I have burns. I've seen people burn themselves too many times where they lay it down and it splashes back at them. So we're just going to let that go. I'm going to kind of stop talking while this goes because I don't know how well I can be heard. And we'll just kind of pick it up from there. So, assuming you can hear me over the crackle of the pan and my hood on, this is something you want to kind of do outside or with a good hood because it is going to smoke a lot. It is also something that when you lay this down, you really don't want to mess with it for the first several minutes. You want to let it go. You want to let that meat, the outside of that meat, really get a good, nice sear on it. One of the things that will happen with this, will help with this too, is to make sure your meat's dry. A lot of moisture, you're going to have a lot of spitting, a lot of steam release that's not going to give you that nice golden color that we're really looking for. Scallops, salmon, things like that, when we sear, you always want them dry as you can get them. So just kind of let that go. We have our oven also preheated to 375. So whenever these are done, we'll go right into there to kind of finish them up. I'm looking for about 145 degrees on there. Pork you can eat rare. It's not something that I like, which is weird because I eat just about everything else rare. Just growing up, I'm used to medium to mid-well. So, do you want to take a little peek at this? See, we're building up that caramelization on it. We're going to give it a little bit of shake, make sure we get some fresh oil under there. You can see the smoke starting to come off of it. My kitchen, I don't have a smoke alarm because anytime I sear something like this, I basically set it off. See our potatoes going in the background. We'll give them a little bit of a twirl. And then we just want to kind of take one, pull it out. They're not there yet. We're just looking for them to be really mashable. Might get a little confusing here as I mix two things into one, but we'll go from there and see what happens. So we're going to take this, look at that other side. I want a little bit more color on it. Just kind of let that go for a few more minutes. All in, this pork chop should take about 10 minutes to cook between being in the skillet and then going in the oven, and then another 10 to 15 minutes to rest afterwards. So one of the things, not so much this little guy, but when you get into cooking things that are a pound or above, they need resting time to finish cooking. You can pull them out 5 or 10 degrees lower than their final temperature and let them come up to that temperature. So we're going to roll that over. We're going to give him another minute or two on that high heat. And you can see all the little protein going. One of the things I'll talk about here while we're waiting for us to do this is doneness. One of the ways I was taught to cook is when cooking, especially proteins, is that your open hand is rare. That's medium rare, medium, mid-well, and well. So the taunter your hand is kind of reflects the doneness in the meat. So with that like that, you take it and slide it into the oven for about 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead with a smaller skillet. You got that good and hot? As a rule of thumb, I am not a big fan of Teflon skillets, but it's about the only one I have here at the house, so. Okay, let that get hot. So these chicken breasts are quite a bit bigger than the ones you'll be getting. We're just going to take and season that skin. And anytime you have an item that has skin on it, that side goes in the pan first. So we're going to let this get up and hot like our brown butter. See, as that starts to bubble and starts to get hot enough, we'll kind of know where it's at. And with it being Teflon, I can start it a little bit lower for temperature and not worry about sticking. I can also use that as a way to render that fat out of the skin and let it start to crisp up. This is especially important with duck when you're cooking that you have that little bit of render time for the skin. Got a little shake, and we're just going to let that go. Give our potatoes a check again. We're still waiting for them to boil off the pan. You'll see the little bit of brownness around the edge. Just give that a little bit of a swirl. Gently, you don't want the skin to stick. You don't want to obviously splash yourself with oil. So you also see through this in the flow of the kitchen, we talk about plates coming up at the same time. The order of getting things together, you know, my garlic went on first, so it got done. My potatoes went on, my pork went in, my chicken's going. See kind of how you have to think about it. I'm actually going to turn this down a little bit because of the skillet size. I don't want that to burn. I want that to render the skin and get a nice golden brown skin on it. But you'll see kind of how, as I'm working, the things that take the longest have gone on first. and then we progress up to the things that are a little bit more last minute or element. We're just going to let that kind of go. Give that a check, see how it looks. We're getting there. With the skin and the fat in the skin, it's a little bit different than the pork and just searing that protein down hard. It'll take a little bit longer to render some of that fat out and to kind of keep it going. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check on my pork loin, where my pork chop list is working. That still feels like it's kind of mid-rare. So I'm just going to let that kind of go. Might give it a little twist to base though some, and then back into the oven. This is where knowing your heat also and knowing what your desired outcome is. We could go high all the way with this. The skin would basically disintegrate to nothing, so we kind of turned it down and we're going to let it go a little bit easier. One of the things we're going to do too is salt. Once that's done, we're going to give that side a little bit of salt. This will take a little bit longer to cook than just a regular boneless chicken breast due to this little bit dark meat here and what you see in there. That little bit of blood coming out, and honestly when you're cooking, a little bit of blood in these areas, even when it's 160, 165 degrees, is fine. It's not going to hurt you. It's the natural. It's actually a sign that the duck hasn't been soaked, or no, duck, I'm sorry, chicken hasn't been soaked in too much liquid. You know, the thing that I always look for when people say chicken's undercooked is that it's like kind of an opaque color, but there's no texture to it. I really don't look for blood. It's kind of like a steak. You would never say a mid-rare steak's undercooked and some blood comes out of it. You know, it's kind of like two different beasts. So you know, I got a nice crispness there. I'm going to take and try to open this up a little bit so it cooks a little bit better. I'm going to pop this in the oven. I'm going to guess on this guy, since he's pretty big, it's going to take about 20 minutes for me. For you guys, it shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes with this chicken breast. So we're going to pop him in here. And while he's in there, we're going to go ahead and start our greens and beans, since they can sit a little bit. About medium heat. I want to take a little bit of that garlic oil. Toss it in there. Now I don't want to let this get as hot as I would my for my, what was that thing I made before? Just to sear my proteins. I want to take it and I want to let my vegetables get translucent. I really don't want them to pick up a lot of flavor. The other thing is this skillet has been sitting right in front of the vent for the stove, so it's kind of been getting hot on its own. One of the tricks in the restaurant when we're going through probably 30 to, I don't know how many of these skillets a night for each individual dish, is you will toss them in the oven. You know, one of the jokes of when we cook on the restaurant ones of these in the kitchen is that they're all kind of washed because they're bowed from the heat. Because we literally will turn the same pan 2-3 times in the oven. So what we're doing here is we're just letting the onions sweat down a little bit. Or saute down, sorry, not sweat. Sweat, you'd start them in a completely cool skillet. We're going to hit them with a little bit of salt and pepper. And just kind of let them start to cook. This is not a traditional greens and beans. This is made to be more kind of like a salad, lighter, not as heavy, not an appetizer, kind of something you would eat in addition to this meal. So again, we're not looking to get any color on them. Nice even coating across the bottom of the pan. While it's doing that, we'll give these a check. When your potatoes get to the point, okay, you take a fork to easily go into them, they're done. We're going to shut them off and let them sit for one moment. So those onions, you can smell them, you can smell if they're kind of cooked now. We're going to go ahead and add our greens. It may look like a lot, it'll cook down to nothing. Joke's always, you know, I cooked 20 pounds of spinach down and I got you know, a top floor. So we're just going to take them. One of the things I really want to do here is I want to make sure that my greens aren't getting cooked to death. I still want them a little bit al dente. So we're just going to take them, swirl them around a little bit. Give my pork a little check. See how that's kind of taunted up. We're going to let that sit for a minute. So once these start to wilt down, we go ahead and add our beans. A couple cloves of our confit garlic. And about half to a third of our chicken stock. One thing you gotta remember is with this chicken stock, or just chicken stock in general, if you're using this is a homemade stock, so there's been no salt added to it. If you're buying chicken stock, try to get the low sodium, or just be mindful of when you start to cook that there is sodium in it. Same thing with the canned beans. There's already a lot of salt in there, so you know this might have to go more to the pepper than the salt side of things. Well, that's kind of coming up to a little bit of a texture, or a little bit of a simmer there. I'm going to temp my pork loin. I don't know if anybody can see this from there, from that camera. You want to go in, you always want to know on a thermometer where your sensor is. This one's the tip, right here. Some of them are in the middle. Just look, there's usually a little dimple. I'm just going to go right in the middle. And I'm looking for about 135 to 140. You know, we're at 123. We're just making sure we're getting that center temperature, not something. Yeah, so we're about 130. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this back in for just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and pull out my chicken. Again, going in sideways. This guy's not even close to being done. Yeah, he's only at 90 some degrees. We're going to pop him back in there and let him go. So with this, yeah, that's pretty much done. Tasting wise, always have a couple tasting spoons with you. Got the good flavors, need some salt. For me, and a little bit of pepper to bring it together. And that's done.